Hi, everybody. I'm Robin Schofield. I'm English faculty at Pikes Peak State College, and I'm also the director of High Impact Practices, together with Joellen Becko and Silva Miller. And I'm also working on high impact practices at the statewide level. We have a really great community of practice among all the 13 community colleges and others. So I'm excited to talk with you today about how you can get involved in teaching with high impact practices at PPSC. So here's our roadmap. We're going to look at the what, why, how of high impact practices. We're going to look at the resources available to you, how you might get involved with other faculty who are doing high impact practices or HIPs, and student opportunities for getting involved in a high impact learning experience. But first, I'd like you to just take 1 minute and reflect on your own experience as a college student. One of the strengths of high impact practices is that it taps into a student's social emotional experience. And when we learn in a social emotional environment, we have better retention of content and actually positive associations around learning. And we might begin to see ourselves as belonging in college. And so what was your most memorable learning activity in college? And I would add to that most memorable positive learning activity in college. As you think about this, you're probably reliving a little bit of the fun, of the engagement, of the meaningfulness of some kind of activity that you were involved in college. And that's what we are trying to create for our students here. So what are high impact practices? They're simply put teaching strategies. They're teaching strategies that engage college students and are positively associated with deeper learning and persistence in college. There are 8 elements that all of the different practices have in common. There are 10 plus practices that you could choose from to implement in your course. And I'll just very briefly tell you what they are. So service learning is integrating in a service project using course curriculum to do something of benefit to with a particular community that the students hopefully would choose. Collaborative projects is a little more than 3 students sitting around a table. It's where they actually work as a team. They begin to learn about team dynamics, team roles, and accomplish something of significance for them. Undergraduate research at the community college level, it looks a little bit more like research experiences. And we have lots of great opportunities for students to report out their findings from their research, which really makes this a more high impact, more engaging experience. We've got writing intensive, diversity global learning, common intellectual experiences, first year experience, learning communities, capstone projects, and internships. I could go on, but you'll find out more about high impact practices in a minute. I also wanted to mention that the elements that these all have in common are challenge, time on task, they're interactive, students learn from diversity, students receive regular and constructive feedback, students are engaged in reflective thinking about their learning and themselves. The project is a real world project. In other words, it has some application outside the classroom. And there's a public demonstration of competence, which could simply be reporting on the students' learning, or it could be a hands-on project like a service learning project out in the community. There are 2 new emerging elements of high impact practices from research from 2021. And one is making a difference. So if we can design something where the students have more agency or they can create a project that they realize they're making a difference for others. And then the other one is very closely related, where the student feels like they can make choices, they have a sense of agency and achievement. This is another way of looking at what high impact practices are. We've designed this, these student learning outcomes around the 8 elements of high impact practices. This is an actual group of social work students who were involved in our very first mobile food markets. And so what do students do in a high impact practice? What do they learn? Students rise to a challenge. Students learn from others. Students improve performance based on feedback and reflection. And students apply learning to real situations. Here are some examples of high impact practices projects done over the years. An ethics class held an event at a local coffee shop to highlight the experiences and the needs in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. The ethics students presented at this. They invited family, friends, neighbors to come to the coffee shop, and it was indeed memorable. Another one is a Smarty assignment. You may have heard of SMART goals. One of our AAA faculty has extended the SMART goals in added inclusion and equity. And so essentially students are making goals for themselves that relate to their career goals, that relate to their lived experiences, and they're reporting back on it. Not only are they learning a great life skill, but they're learning a great college success skill. The math colloquium, the math department puts together a colloquium every semester, and their math students present on math concepts and math findings, things that they're learning in class, together as an academic community. And it's actually kind of a big deal. There's food, there's a keynote, and there's really a sense of excitement about participating as an academic person with their faculty members. A literacy fair was put together by some of our children's literacy courses, or excuse me, children's literature courses. And the students did some research about low performing schools in the area in terms of literacy, contacted the school principal, set up a full day of activities and events for students at that school. And all the students in several classes at Pikes Peak were able to participate either by preparing the activities or actually being there on the day of the event. And lastly, this is a nice one for online or virtual learning, community advocacy proposals. I actually do that as an English faculty, and I have students talk about their community. They begin to research what does it mean to be a member of a community. And then they identify an issue in their community that they're passionate about. Either it's something that they want to correct or fix, or something that they feel like other people should know more about. And then they do an interview with a community partner, somebody who is either a person or a group that has the power to affect change in that particular issue. And so they end up doing a lot of research around the topic and then writing a proposal to that group or person. And they have to think about what's viable, what's necessary, who to involve, and so on. I've had a number of students to actually create change in their communities because of their writing. So we've been talking about what are HIPs, and now we're going to talk about why HIPs. So high impact practices, as I said before, are strategies that really engage students. And one of the things that we found out early on is that that level of engagement actually helps students who have been historically underrepresented in college success measures to be more successful in college. And so originally it was called compensatory effects. The idea that if I can engage a student in a different kind of way, they might actually stick with their education. They might be more engaged in that education and more aware of how they learn and who they are as a learner and so forth. There's also a workforce readiness component. Our general education outcomes are designed around workforce readiness. And then the National Association of Colleges and Employers, NACE, also identifies these workforce readiness skills and dispositions that come alive during these high impact practices experiences. And lastly, high impact practices have been very good for the adult learners at Pikes Peak. In our 25 to 34 range, these students are doing even better than other students with high impact practices. Why is that? Well, adult learners, we know they need relevance, they need agency, and they need practice. So those are some of the whys. I'd like you to take just a moment to think about your why. You know, why are you here? Why are you teaching? What is it that gets you pretty excited about that classroom environment and experience? This is a picture I took at our Centennial campus of one of our students leaving for the day with, it looks like probably his daughter there. I thought this is a great picture to remind me of my why. I really want to impact individual students. I want to see them achieve their goals, and I want to see that influence their families, their trajectory, their communities, and really even broader than that. So I think education is the way to do that. And so I want to adapt my teaching methods to methods that really engage community college students. And that's why I'm so excited about high impact practices. All right, now we're to the how of high impact practices. These are your 8 elements of high impact practices. And I'll just briefly go through what these are. These are kind of the components of design for creating a high impact practice experience for your students, or project or assignment for your students. So you can think of these a little bit as a checklist. And as I get started talking about these, I'd like for you to think about your most engaging assignment that you're already doing in your discipline. It's the one that students get kind of excited about. It's the one there's more chatter about. Maybe you just see your students learning more. Perhaps you're seeing them develop those skills and dispositions for workforce readiness. It could be any of those things, but I'm guessing you'll see some of these components in that assignment that you've already designed. So what can you do today? Go through this checklist, and if there's a component here that I mentioned that's missing or isn't fully developed in that assignment, just tinker with the assignment a little bit, adjust it a little bit, and that will increase the engagement for your students and thereby improve their retention in college and all kinds of other factors. So the 8 elements. Challenge is one of them. It means that you're assigning a project that's going to feel like the student achieved something when they're done. There are probably opportunities for either leadership or agency. Time is another one, time on task. And this doesn't mean to overload your students with homework. It means that it's integrated into the course. So there's multiple steps. There's 4 to 6 weeks. That's just an average time frame. It could be less, but it's not a one and done usually. Even if it's an event-centered kind of high impact practice, there's a lot of preparation before, and there's a lot of debriefing and reflecting afterward. Interactive and diversity are 2 more of the 8 elements of high impact practices. So interactive, if you think about it, your students are discussing, they're deciding, they're processing with others. There's very much a shoulder to shoulder feeling as a team, even with the faculty member or maybe a community member with which they're working. Diversity is the idea that we would be learning from unfamiliar people or situations. So things that I haven't experienced before, or people that are unusual for me to come across. Not that I'm just meeting them or they exist in my space, but that I'm actually learning something from others and from new situations. Feedback and reflection are the next two high impact practice elements. So feedback can be from a number of areas and in a number of ways, from peers, from the faculty member, from community members. It can be informal, formal, nonverbal, oral, written, and just integrating that into being a regular part of what happens in the classroom as your students are engaging in this high impact practice. Reflection is another great way for the student to give themselves feedback, really. Oftentimes we think of it as, in the past of what did I learn? Why is it relevant to me? What does it mean to my career? What does it mean to me as a college student or as a citizen or a community member? But it can also be forward thinking. So what do I think I'm going to learn? What's something I've experienced in my life already that might be relevant to what we're talking about here? So the idea of prognosticate, connect to prior learning, review, reflect. The next two are real world and public. Sometimes for transfer disciplines, these might be the two that are a little more difficult to wrap our heads around or design or know how to design for our students. So the real world would be something outside of class, applied learning to a real situation. This is a little different than just a case study that's theoretical in your classroom. It's where the student's taking action outside of class in a way that they feel is meaningful or productive. And then the last one is public, where students share their learning beyond the class. I would say in some of the high impact practices like service learning, real world and public are embedded in the practice. Other practices like undergraduate research, maybe not so much. And so the way I would design for those like undergraduate research would be to allow my students to choose a real world topic that they're going to actually share the research out in a public forum. And so those are the 8 elements of high impact practices. It's a way for you to know that you're designing around student engagement. Okay, so we're a little bit back to the beginning here. I just want to let you know that we do have a HIPS guide and a HIPS website. And so you find that at pikespeak.edu/HIPS. When you go to that website, please take a look around. There's some ongoing events happening. There's some student-facing resources. There's a little bit of explanation of some of our high-impact practices. But right when you land there in the quick links box, it says Faculty HIPS Guide. That'll take you to lots and lots more resources. And then you can always contact our team at hips@pikespeak.edu. If this is really interesting to you and you want to find a community of other faculty or instructors to talk with about teaching, just join our HIPS committee. It's a nice service to the college. It's once a month, virtual, and we typically meet second Fridays at 10 a.m. You'll see emails go out from HIPS. But what do? We share our best practices for teaching. We give each other ideas, we brainstorm, sometimes we problem solve, but it's a time for teachers to talk about teaching and learning. And lastly, we want you to know that students have lots of opportunities to get involved in high impact practices outside the classroom. Now, I will say this, the best way for a student to experience engaged learning is through their coursework. And that's why we're really excited about you considering designing a high impact practice project for your class. But there are other ways. If you want to just get your feet wet and direct your students to a couple of these opportunities, please do so. So we have the Expo. It's part of our Pikes Peak publications. It's an online site, and really any class can highlight student work in the Expo. And all you do is you contact HIPS at pikespeak.edu and let them know your students want to share out their work. And that's how you get that going. The Global Village is another great way. It's a weekly conversation across campuses led by students, and typically students who have either a global background or a global outlook. And students talk about international diverse issues, but they also talk about student issues. And then lastly, we have a number of conference-like involvements for students. The Math Colloquium that I already spoke about, and then the Colorado Springs Undergraduate Research Forum is a partnership with the Air Force Academy, UCCS, and Colorado College and Pikes Peak. Our students do really well at this. And so that's just another one. You can find out all kinds of information about those student opportunities on our website. Well, thanks for hanging in there. We're so glad that you're here, that you're teaching at Pikes Peak, and that you're interested in improving student engagement and student learning in your courses.